My name is Margaret Helen Crawford. I'm 72 years old, and I'm about to tell you the story of how I died twice, once on paper and once in my heart. It started 6 months ago when my doctor told me I had stage 3 lung cancer. I'd never smoked a day in my life, but there it was, spreading through my chest like a dark secret I couldn't keep anymore. The first person I called was my eldest son, Richard. He was always the responsible one, the lawyer, the one who handled things. "Mom," he said after a long pause, his voice suddenly very businesslike. "Have you thought about updating your will? Just to make sure everything is in order. For your own peace of mind." I sat there in the doctor's parking lot, staring at the phone, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. "Not, are you okay?" "Not, what did the doctor say?" "Just the will." My daughter Caroline called that evening. She'd heard from Richard. "Mom, I'm so sorry," she began, and for a moment I thought she actually cared. "Listen, I know this is hard, but Richard mentioned you haven't updated your estate plan in years. With the real estate market the way it is, and the lake house value, we should probably—" I hung up. My youngest, Thomas, at least waited 2 days before bringing it up. He came to visit, brought flowers, sat with me for exactly 20 minutes before saying, "Mom, I don't want to be morbid, but have you thought about what you want done with your things? Eventually. I just want to make sure we honor your wishes." I looked at my 3 children, the ones I'd raised alone after their father died when they were small, the ones I'd worked 2 jobs to put through college, the ones I'd given everything to, and I realized something that broke me. They were waiting for me to die. Not hoping, not wishing, just waiting. Calculating. Planning. That night, I sat in my study with a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Though I'm not sure what occasion could be more special than realizing your children see you as an inheritance rather than a mother. I looked at my will, the one I'd written 10 years ago, splitting everything equally among the 3 of them. The house worth $800,000, the lake cottage worth $450,000, my investment portfolio worth roughly $1.2 million, and various other assets. Everything I'd spent 50 years building. And I thought about something my own mother once told me. You never really know someone until money's involved. So I decided to test them. I called my estate attorney, David Morrison, a man I'd known for 30 years. "David," I said, "I need you to do something unusual. I want to create 3 different wills." There was silence on the line. "Margaret, that's not. I know it's not standard. But here's what I want to do." I explained my plan. I would create 3 separate wills, each one legitimate looking, each one notarized, each one distributing my assets differently. Then I would accidentally let each of my children discover their own version. I wanted to see what they would do with the information. Would they come to me? Would they talk to each other? Or would they simply wait, assuming their version was the real one? David was hesitant, but he'd known me long enough to understand that when I made up my mind, I made up my mind. "This could get complicated," he warned. "That's exactly what I'm counting on," I replied. We spent 3 weeks drafting the documents. The first will, the one I would let Richard find, left him the house and 60% of the investment portfolio, with Caroline and Thomas each getting 20% and some smaller assets. It was the responsible eldest son version. The second will for Caroline left her the lake cottage, 50% of the investments, and my jewelry collection worth about $80,000. Richard got 30%, Thomas got 20%. It played into her long-standing resentment about being the only daughter and feeling overlooked. The third will for Thomas, the one who always complained he was the forgotten youngest, left him 50% of everything, with Richard and Caroline splitting the remainder. Each will had a specific clause that would reveal itself if contested. A requirement that any challenge to the will would result in that person being completely disinherited. It was insurance against them fighting each other too openly. Then came the hard part. I had to plant these documents where my children would find them, but in a way that seemed accidental. Richard was easy. He had a key to my house and often stopped by when I wasn't home to check on things. I left his version in my desk drawer, just visible under some other papers. Caroline was trickier. I invited her for lunch and excused myself at a strategic moment, leaving my handbag open with the document folder just peeking out. When I came back, she was looking at her phone, but the folder had been moved slightly. Thomas required a more direct approach. I asked him to help me organize my filing cabinet and made sure his version was in a folder labeled Important Estate Documents. I pretended to take a phone call and left the room. When I came back, he was suspiciously quiet. Then I waited. The first week, nothing. They called with their usual frequency, which is to say, not very often. But I could feel something had shifted. The calls were slightly more frequent, their tones slightly warmer. They were being nicer to me, and it made me sadder than I can describe. The second week, Richard invited me to dinner at his house, something he hadn't done in over a year. His wife, Patricia, was overly attentive, asking about my health, my comfort, whether I needed anything at all. Richard kept steering the conversation toward my legacy, and how proud I must be of everything I'd built. "You've worked so hard your whole life, Mom," he said, pouring me another glass of wine. "You deserve to rest now, to not worry about things. We'll take care of everything." I smiled and said nothing. The third week, Caroline took me shopping. Her treat, she insisted. She bought me an expensive scarf I'd never wear and talked about how much the lake cottage meant to her, how many memories we'd made there, how she'd always dreamed of retiring there someday. "I hope you know how much I appreciate everything you've done for me," she said, squeezing my hand. "I think about it all the time." Thomas started calling every other day, just to check in. He'd never been particularly attentive, always too busy with his startup ideas and get-rich-quick schemes. Now suddenly he had time to chat, to ask about my day, to reminisce about his childhood. "You were always there for me, Mom," he said during one call. "I don't think I ever thanked you enough." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them I knew what they were doing, that I could see through their sudden affection like it was glass. But I didn't, because I needed to know how far they would go. That's when I came up with the second part of my plan. If I really wanted to test them, I needed to raise the stakes. I needed to die. Not really, of course, but on paper. With David's help, I arranged to stage my death. It was easier than you might think. I have a friend, Dr. Patricia Holloway, who runs a small private practice. She agreed to create false medical records showing a sudden decline in my condition, a hospitalization, and finally, a death certificate. It cost me $10,000 in cash, and her solemn promise never to speak of it. "Margaret, are you sure about this?" she asked me as she prepared the paperwork. "What you're about to witness might destroy you." "It already has," I replied. "I just need to see it with my own eyes." We scheduled my death for a Friday evening. Patricia would make the calls, inform my children that I'd been rushed to the hospital and had passed away peacefully, that I'd been too sedated to call them myself in the final hours. It was cruel, I know. But cruelty was something I'd learned from watching my children calculate my worth based on when I would cease to exist. The calls went out at 7:43 p.m. on October 13th. I was actually sitting in Patricia's office, listening on speakerphone as she delivered the news to Richard. His response was pitch perfect: shock, denial, a choked sob. "I can't believe it," he kept saying. "I just talked to her 3 days ago. She seemed fine." But within 2 minutes, I heard him say to Patricia, "What happens now? With her estate, I mean. Is there a will? When can we access it?" Patricia told him there would be a reading of the will at my attorney's office the following week. After he hung up, I sat there staring at the phone. 2 minutes. That's how long it took for my son to ask about my money. Caroline's call was shorter. More tears, more theatrics, but the same question. Did she have everything in order? Her affairs, I mean. Thomas actually surprised me. He was quiet for a long time after Patricia told him. Then he asked, "Was she alone?" For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. "No," Patricia lied kindly. "She had medical staff with her. It was very peaceful." "Good," Thomas said. Then, after a pause, "When is the will reading?" "Richard and Caroline are going to try to take everything. I need to know where I stand." That's when I started crying. Patricia held my hand and didn't say anything because there was nothing to say. My funeral was scheduled for the following Wednesday. I would be watching from a distance, from a car parked across the street from the church, wearing dark glasses and a scarf. David had arranged for a closed casket, supposedly because I'd requested it, but actually because there was no body. A funeral home friend of Patricia's had provided an empty casket for the service. The morning of the funeral, I positioned myself in David's car with tinted windows, parked where I could see everyone arriving. It was a gray October day, appropriate weather for a funeral. I watched as friends began to arrive, my book club, neighbors, people from the charity boards I'd served on. They looked genuinely sad. Many were crying. Mrs. Henderson from next door was sobbing so hard her husband had to hold her up. She was the woman who'd brought me soup every week during my chemotherapy treatments, the real ones I'd actually gone through. She was the one who'd sat with me when I was too sick to get out of bed, who'd held my hair back when I vomited, who'd never once asked me about my will or my money. She just loved me. And here I was, letting her believe I was dead. The guilt was overwhelming, but I couldn't stop now. Then my children arrived. Richard pulled up in his BMW, Patricia beside him. They were dressed in black, looking appropriately somber. But as they walked toward the church, I saw Richard check his watch and say something to Patricia that made her nod quickly. Business as usual. Caroline arrived with her husband, Marcus. She was wearing a dramatic black dress and dark sunglasses, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. But when she thought no one was looking, I saw her check her phone and smile at something on the screen. Thomas came alone. He looked terrible, actually, like he hadn't slept. His suit was wrinkled, his tie crooked. I felt that flicker of hope again. Maybe Thomas actually cared. The service was beautiful, I have to admit. David had arranged everything according to my very specific instructions. My pastor, Father Michael, gave a lovely eulogy about my charity work, my strength as a single mother, my contributions to the community. People shared stories about me. My friend Helen from book club talked about my love of mystery novels. Margaret always said the best mysteries were the ones where you thought you knew the ending, but the author surprised you. I smiled bitterly at that. If only she knew. Mrs. Henderson spoke too, barely able to get through her words. Margaret was the kindest person I've ever known, she said through tears. When my husband had his stroke last year, she was there every single day. She brought food, she helped with bills, she just sat with me when I couldn't stand to be alone. She never asked for anything in return. She just loved. I had to look away. I'd forgotten about that. About sitting with Mrs. Henderson in her kitchen, holding her hand while she cried about maybe losing her husband of 40 years. About the weeks I'd spent helping her navigate insurance paperwork and medical bills. About how I'd anonymously paid their mortgage for 3 months when they couldn't afford it. I'd forgotten that I was capable of that kind of love. That people had seen me as someone worth mourning not for what I could give them, but for who I was. Then it was time for my children to speak. Richard went first. He walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and spoke about what a pillar of strength I'd been, how I'd sacrificed everything for my children, how I'd taught them the value of hard work and financial responsibility. My mother built an empire from nothing, he said, his voice strong and clear. She was a businesswoman, an investor, a provider. Everything I know about success I learned from her. Not one word about love. Not one memory of laughter, or bedtime stories, or the time I drove through a snowstorm to pick him up from college when his car broke down. Just success. Business. Empire. Caroline spoke next. Her speech was more emotional, lots of tears, lots of pauses. She talked about how I was always there for her, how I was her best friend, how she would treasure our time at the lake house forever. That lake house she'd visited exactly 3 times in the past 5 years. My mother taught me to be strong, Caroline said, her voice breaking. She showed me that women can do anything, be anything. She built a life for us when Dad died, and she never complained, never asked for help. She was perfect. Perfect. As if I were a statue instead of a person. As if I'd never been scared or lonely or desperate for someone to just see me. Then Thomas. He stood at the podium for a long moment without speaking, his hands gripping the edges. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. My mom was the strongest person I ever knew, he began. When Dad died, she didn't fall apart. She worked 2 jobs. She made sure we had everything we needed. She never complained. He paused, wiping his eyes. I know I haven't been the son she deserved. I know I should have visited more, called more, been there more. And now I'll never get the chance to make it up to her. I started crying in the car. Maybe I'd been wrong about Thomas. Maybe he actually, but I want to honor her memory, he continued, by making sure her legacy is protected. She worked too hard to build what she built for it to be squandered or fought over. I'm going to make sure her wishes are respected, whatever they are. I'm going to make sure Richard and Caroline don't waste what she spent her whole life building. There it was. Even in his grief, even in his regret, it came back to the money. The legacy. The inheritance. After the service, I watched as people gathered outside the church. My children stood together, accepting condolences, hugging friends and neighbors. To anyone watching, they looked like a loving family united in grief. But I had David's car positioned close enough to hear them when they thought no one was listening. They'd moved away from the crowd, standing in a small cluster near the parking lot. The will reading is tomorrow at 2 p.m., Richard said quietly. We should all be there. Obviously, Caroline replied. I already cleared my schedule. Do you think Mom left any surprises? Thomas asked. Richard's laugh was sharp. You mean, do I think she changed her will at the last minute? I doubt it. She wasn't exactly thinking clearly toward the end. How would you know? Thomas snapped. You barely visited her. Oh, that's rich coming from you, Richard shot back. When's the last time you saw her before she got sick? 2 years ago. 3. At least when I visited, I didn't treat her like a business meeting, Thomas said. At least I actually talked to her instead of just discussing her portfolio. Gentlemen, please, Caroline interrupted. We're at Mom's funeral. Can we at least pretend to have some respect? Respect? Thomas laughed bitterly. Like the respect you showed by asking her about the lake house the day after her diagnosis? Caroline's face flushed. I was trying to help her organize her affairs. Someone had to think practically. You were thinking about yourself, Thomas said. We all were. Let's just be honest about it for once. There was a long silence. Then Richard spoke, his voice cold and calculating. Look, here's what we know. Mom wrote a will. We've all seen different versions of it. Tomorrow we'll find out which one is real. Until then, let's just keep our mouths shut and act like we're devastated. We are devastated, Caroline protested weakly. Are we? Richard asked. Because I don't know about you two, but I'm mostly just anxious about tomorrow. I want to know if I'm getting the house. I want to know if all those visits and phone calls were worth it. Jesus, Richard, Thomas breathed. We're standing outside her funeral. And she's dead, Richard replied. She can't hear us. She doesn't know what we're thinking. So can we please just drop the act for 5 minutes and be real? I visited her more than both of you combined in the last 3 months. I sat through her complaints about her health, her boring stories about the neighbors, her endless advice about my career. If anyone earned that inheritance, it's me. I took her shopping, Caroline said. I spent time with her. I listened. You listened for information, Thomas corrected. We all did. We were all trying to figure out if she was going to change her will, if we were still in it, if we'd get what we thought we deserved. Another silence. Then Caroline said softly, When did we become these people? Probably around the time we realized Mom was worth $2.5 million, Richard replied. Money changes things. You know what? I'm not going to feel guilty about wanting my share. She's our mother. We're her children. We have a right to inherit what she spent her life building. Do we, though? Thomas asked. I mean, really? She built it. She earned it. We just existed. We grew up and left, and only came back when we needed something. Maybe we don't deserve any of it. Well, that's convenient for you to say now, Caroline snapped, since your version of the will gives you 50% of everything. Easy to be philosophical when you're about to be rich. How do you know what my version says? Thomas asked slowly. Caroline froze. Richard's head snapped toward her. What do you mean, your version? He asked. The three of them stared at each other, realization dawning on their faces. She gave us different wills, Thomas said. Oh my God. She gave us each a different version. That's impossible, Richard said, but his voice was uncertain. Why would she? To see what we'd do, Caroline finished. To test us. To see if we'd tell each other, if we'd come to her, if we'd. She stopped, her hand over her mouth. We failed, Thomas said quietly. Whatever the test was, we failed. They stood there in the cemetery, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass, and I watched my children understand what they'd become. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like mourning. But I couldn't stop now. I had one more scene to play. The will reading was scheduled for 2 p.m. the next day at David's office. Of course, there would be 3 separate meetings. One for each child, each believing they were attending the reading of the real will. David had arranged for a colleague to handle the fake readings while he dealt with the actual legal implications of what we were about to do. But before any of that could happen, I needed to make one more appearance. At 1:45 p.m., I walked into David's office through the back entrance. I was wearing a simple black dress, my hair done, my makeup perfect. I looked very much alive. Richard was already in the waiting room when I walked through. The expression on his face was something I will remember until my actual dying day. His mouth fell open. The color drained from his face. He stood up so quickly he knocked his chair backward. "Mom," he whispered. "What, how?" "Hello, Richard," I said calmly. "Surprised to see me? But you're dead. We had your funeral yesterday. I don't understand." "Oh, I think you understand perfectly. You understand that I was testing you. That I needed to see who you really were when you thought I couldn't see anymore." His face went from shock to confusion to something that looked almost like anger. "You faked your death? Do you have any idea what you put us through? Do you have any idea what you put me through?" I countered. "When I called to tell you about my cancer, and your first question was about my will." He flinched. Caroline arrived next, walking in while talking on her phone. She saw me and dropped it. The screen cracked on the marble floor. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Mom, I can't. You're supposed to be dead." "I know what I'm supposed to be," I replied. "The question is what you're supposed to be. My daughter? Or someone waiting for me to die so you can get a lake house?" Her eyes filled with tears. "That's not fair. I loved you. I love you. Do you? Or do you love what I can give you?" Thomas was last. He actually started crying when he saw me, real tears this time, I think. He rushed forward like he was going to hug me, then stopped, uncertain. "Mom! Thank God! We thought, how is this possible?" "Sit down, Thomas," I said gently. "All of you sit down." I gestured for them to follow me into David's conference room. They moved like sleepwalkers, unable to process what they were seeing. David was already there, 3 folders laid out on the table. "Please sit," I said. They sat. "I'm sure you have questions," I continued. "Like, how am I alive? Why did I fake my death? What is going on?" They nodded, speechless. "The answer is simple. I needed to know the truth about who you are. And I needed to test you." I opened the first folder and pulled out the will Richard had found. "Richard, you thought I left you the house and 60% of my investments." I opened the second folder. "Caroline, you thought you were getting the lake house and 50% of my investments plus my jewelry." I opened the third folder. "Thomas, you thought I was leaving you 50% of everything." Their faces went from confused to pale to horrified as they realized what I'd done. "But none of these wills are real," I said. "They were tests. And you all failed." Richard found his voice first. "This is insane. You faked your own death to, what? To play mind games. I faked my death to see what you would do when you thought I was gone. To see if you would mourn me, or just fight over my money. And I got my answer." "That's not fair," Caroline protested. "We were devastated." "Were you?" I asked. "Because I was at my own funeral, Caroline. I heard your eulogy. I heard you talk about the lake house and how perfect I was, like I was some kind of saint instead of your mother. I heard all 3 of you outside the church discussing the will reading before my body was even cold. I heard you calculate how many visits you'd made, like you were keeping score for an inheritance competition." The room was silent. I heard Richard ask about my estate 2 minutes after being told I died. I heard you, Caroline, check your phone and smile during the funeral. I heard you, Thomas, talk about protecting my legacy, when what you really meant was making sure you got your share. "Mom, that's not," Thomas started. "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't insult me by lying now. I know exactly who you are. All of you. You're the children who stopped visiting unless you needed something. You're the children who called to check on my will, not my health. You're the children who saw my cancer diagnosis as an opportunity to discuss estate planning." Tears were running down my face now, but my voice stayed steady. "Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't realizing you only cared about my money. It was realizing you didn't even care enough to pretend otherwise when you thought I was dead. At my own funeral, you couldn't go 2 hours without discussing what you were going to inherit. Mrs. Henderson, who's not even related to me, cried harder than any of you. She loved me. Actually loved me. And you 3, the people I gave everything to, you just wanted to know when you'd get your payoff." Caroline was sobbing now. Thomas had his head in his hands. Richard just stared at the table, his jaw clenched. David pulled out a fourth folder. "This is my real will," I said. "The one that's actually legally binding. Would you like to know what it says?" They stared at me, frozen. "I'm leaving my entire estate, all $2.5 million of it, to charity. The house, the lake cottage, the investments, all of it. It's going to establish a foundation for cancer patients who don't have family support. It's called the Margaret Foundation for the Forgotten." Caroline gasped. Thomas dropped his head into his hands. Richard's face turned red. "You can't do this," Richard said, his voice rising. "We're your children. We have a right." "A right to what?" I snapped. "To money you didn't earn? To assets I built while you were busy living your own lives? You have a right to nothing except what I choose to give you." "But we're family," Caroline pleaded through her tears. "Are we?" I asked. "Because family is supposed to be about more than inheritance. Family is supposed to visit when you're sick, not disappear until there's a will to discuss. Family is supposed to mourn you when you die, not immediately start calculating what they're going to get. Family is supposed to love you for who you are, not what you have." "We do love you," Thomas said quietly, his voice breaking. We made mistakes. We were awful. But please, Mom, please don't do this. Don't cut us out completely. Give us a chance to make it right." I looked at him for a long moment. Out of the three of them, Thomas looked the most genuinely remorseful. But was it remorse for how he'd treated me, or remorse that he wasn't getting any money? "I have a proposal," I said finally. "For the next year, I want you to visit me once a week. Not to discuss my health or my assets. Just to visit. To talk. To be my children, not my heirs. At the end of that year, I'll consider amending my will." "And if we don't?" Richard asked. "Then you get nothing. The will stands as is. Every penny goes to the foundation." "That's blackmail," Caroline said. "No," I corrected. "Blackmail is threatening to expose something. I'm simply requiring that my children act like family if they want to be treated like family. I'm offering you a chance to prove that you can love me for reasons other than money. 1 year. 52 visits. That's all I'm asking." "What if you die before the year is up?" Richard asked, and I couldn't tell if he was being practical or hopeful. "Then the will stands as is," I replied. "And you'll spend the rest of your lives knowing you couldn't even give your dying mother 1 year of genuine attention." They looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. "We'll do it," Thomas said finally. "Whatever you want. However you want it. We'll do it." "I want it to be real," I said. "I have cameras installed in my house now. With audio. I will know if you're just going through the motions. I will know if you're counting down the days until you can get your money. This is your one chance to prove me wrong about who you are." Caroline was still crying. "How do we prove something like that? How do we show you we love you when you don't trust us?" "That's the question you should have been asking yourselves 3 months ago," I replied. "When you were calling to ask about my will instead of asking about my pain. When you were calculating your inheritance instead of just sitting with me. Figure it out. You have 1 year." I stood to leave, then turned back. "One more thing. I want each of you to volunteer at the cancer center where I receive treatment. 4 hours a week. You're going to sit with patients who don't have families. You're going to hear their stories. You're going to understand what it means to be at the end of your life, taking inventory of who showed up and who didn't." "Mom," Richard started. "Those are my terms," I said firmly. "Visit me once a week. Volunteer 4 hours a week. Do both for 1 year. Then I'll reconsider my will. Or don't, and the foundation gets everything. Your choice." I left them sitting there, stunned and silent. David followed me out. "Do you really think they'll change?" he asked me in the hallway. "I don't know," I admitted. But I had to give them the chance. Because otherwise, I'm just a bitter old woman who died alone and angry. And maybe I'm fooling myself, maybe they'll just be going through the motions for a year, but at least I'll get 52 more visits with my children before I actually die. "You're not foolish," David said gently. "You're heartbroken. There's a difference." "Is there?" I asked. Because right now they feel like the same thing. That was 6 months ago. Today I'm sitting in my study, the same room where I first hatched my plan, writing this all down because I want there to be a record. A testimony to what happened. A warning to other parents who might be wondering if their children love them, or just love their money. Richard comes to visit every Wednesday now. At first, he was stiff, clearly uncomfortable, checking his watch every few minutes. He'd ask about my health, not because he cared, I could tell, but because he thought that's what he was supposed to do. He'd make conversation about his work, his wife, surface-level things that required no emotional vulnerability. But lately, something's been changing. Last Wednesday, he stayed for 3 hours. We didn't talk about anything important, just watched old family videos from when he was a kid. Footage of his father, who died when Richard was only 12. Footage of birthday parties and Christmas mornings and ordinary Tuesday afternoons that had somehow become precious in retrospect. At one point, Richard started crying. "I forgot how much he loved us," he said, watching his father on the screen, young and healthy and laughing. "I forgot what it looked like when someone loved us without expecting anything in return." "Your father would be disappointed in who you've become," I said quietly. "I know," Richard replied. "I'm disappointed too." We sat in silence for a while, watching ghosts on a screen. Then Richard said, "I've started therapy. Patricia thinks I have problems with emotional availability, with viewing relationships as transactional. She says I learned it from my work, but I think I learned it from fear." "Fear of what?" "Fear of needing people," he said. "Fear of being vulnerable. Fear of loving someone who might leave. Like Dad did. Like you almost did." It was the most honest thing he'd said to me in years. Maybe ever. Caroline visits on Sundays now. She's been helping me with my garden, something we used to do together when she was young. At first, she was obviously just trying to check a box, fulfill an obligation. But lately, she's been staying longer, talking more. She's started opening up about her marriage problems, things she never would have discussed with me before. 2 weeks ago, she cried in my kitchen about feeling like she'd wasted her life chasing money instead of meaning. "Marcus wants to move to a bigger house," she sobbed. "He's always wanting more, better, newer. And I realized I married someone just like me. Someone who thinks happiness can be purchased. Someone who doesn't know how to just be content with what they have." I held her while she cried and felt something crack open in my chest that I'd thought was closed forever. "It's not too late," I told her. "You're only 45. You have time to become someone different." "Do I?" she asked. "Because sometimes I think I'm too far gone. Too broken. Too much like the person you saw at that funeral." "The fact that you're asking that question means you're not," I replied. "The people who are truly lost don't even know they're lost." She comes to volunteer at the cancer center with me now. At first, I think she did it because she had to. But last week, I watched her sit with a woman named Dorothy who was dying alone, no family, no friends. Caroline held her hand for 2 hours, just sat with her, and when Dorothy finally fell asleep, Caroline came out into the hallway and said, "How did we become a society where people die alone? Where families abandon their parents, their grandparents, their sick relatives? What's wrong with us?" "I don't know," I said. "But maybe awareness is the first step to change." Thomas comes by randomly, which is very Thomas. Sometimes twice a week, sometimes not at all for 10 days. But when he comes, he really talks. About his failed businesses, his fears of ending up alone, his regrets about the time he's wasted. Last month, he asked me if I thought he could still make something of his life at 38. I told him yes, absolutely, that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. "I've been thinking about Dad a lot lately," he said during his last visit. "About how he died so young. How he never got to see us grow up. How he'd probably be ashamed of what we became." "He'd be proud that you're trying to change," I replied. "That counts for something." "Does it?" Thomas asked. "Because sometimes I think I'm only changing because you're bribing me with an inheritance. And that makes me even worse than I was before." "Are you?" I asked. "Only changing because of the money?" He thought about it for a long time. "I don't know anymore," he finally said. "At first, yes. Absolutely. I was furious about what you did, about the fake death and the test and the manipulation. I thought you were crazy. I thought you were being cruel. But then I started coming here, started spending time with you, started actually talking instead of just visiting, and I realized something. I'd forgotten you were a person. For years, you were just Mom. Just this entity that was supposed to be there, supposed to support me, supposed to eventually leave me an inheritance. You weren't Margaret. You weren't a woman with thoughts and feelings and a whole life that had nothing to do with me. You were just a role. And I'm ashamed of that." It was the most self-aware thing any of my children had said. Are they doing this because they genuinely care, or because they want back into my will? I honestly don't know, and here's what I've learned. Maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the act of showing up, of putting in the time, of having the conversations, is what creates the caring. Maybe love isn't just a feeling you have. It's also a series of actions you take, repeated over time until they become genuine. Maybe my children didn't know how to love me properly because I never taught them that love requires effort, not just emotion. Or maybe I'm just a foolish old woman, desperately trying to rewrite the ending of a story that was finished the moment they asked about my will instead of my health. Either way, something has changed. Last Tuesday, all 3 of my children showed up at the same time. Unplanned, coincidental. I was in the garden when I heard voices in the house, and I came inside to find the 3 of them in my kitchen, actually talking to each other. Not arguing. Not competing. Just talking. "Mom," Richard said when he saw me, "we've been discussing something. The 3 of us have been thinking about the foundation you're starting. The one for cancer patients without family support. What about it?" I asked cautiously. "We want to help," Caroline said. "Not financially, we know that's not what this is about. But with our time, with our skills. Richard's a lawyer, he could help with the legal structure. I have connections in the nonprofit world from my charity board work. Thomas has marketing experience from his failed startups." Thomas smiled wryly at that. "We want to be part of it," he continued. "Not to get back into your good graces, or to earn our inheritance. But because it matters. Because after spending time at the cancer center, we've seen what you saw. People dying alone, people without support, people who need exactly what this foundation could provide." I sat down heavily in one of my kitchen chairs, feeling tears prick my eyes. "You don't have to do this," I said. "We know," Richard replied. "That's why we want to. That's the whole point." We spent that evening planning. For the first time in years, maybe ever, we worked together as a family without any hidden agendas or unspoken resentments. We ordered pizza, spread papers across my dining room table, and talked about mission statements and volunteer recruitment and how to identify patients who needed support. At one point, Caroline looked up from her notes and said, "Remember when we used to do this? When we were kids? We'd all sit around this same table working on school projects or planning birthday parties, or just being together." "Before Dad died," Thomas said quietly. "Everything changed after Dad died," Richard added. "Not just because he was gone, but because we all shut down. We stopped being a family and became this collection of individuals just orbiting around you, Mom, taking what we needed but never really connecting." "I think I taught you that," I said. "After your father died, I was so focused on providing, on making sure you had everything materially, that I forgot to teach you about the things that actually matter. I worked 2 jobs, I built investments, I created financial security. But I didn't create emotional security. I didn't show you that love is about presence, not presence." "That's not true," Caroline protested. "You were always there for us." "Physically, yes," I replied. "But emotionally? I was so exhausted, so focused on survival, that I think I became more of a provider than a parent. And you learned from me that relationships are about what you can offer, what you can give, what you're worth financially rather than emotionally." We sat with that for a while, the weight of generational patterns and learned behaviors settling around us. "So we all failed each other," Thomas said finally. "In different ways at different times. But we all contributed to this." "Yes," I agreed. "And now we have a choice about what we do next." That was 3 months ago. Today, the Margaret Crawford Foundation for the Forgotten is officially operational. We had our first board meeting last week. Me, my 3 children, David the attorney, Dr. Patricia Holloway, Mrs. Henderson from next door, and 3 former patients from the cancer center who understand what it means to go through treatment without family support. Richard has taken a leave of absence from his law firm to work on this full-time. "I've spent 20 years building a career that doesn't matter," he told me. "I want to spend whatever time we have left building something that does." Caroline has transformed. She ended up separating from Marcus, who couldn't understand why she wanted to waste time on charity work instead of focusing on their social status. "I married him because he was successful," she told me one evening. "Because he looked good on paper. Because I thought that's what mattered. I'm done making decisions based on what looks good to other people." Thomas has thrown himself into the marketing and outreach work. He's created social media campaigns, organized fundraising events, connected with local businesses for sponsorships. All those failed businesses taught me something after all, he jokes. I know how to sell an idea. I'm just finally selling one that matters. But more than the foundation work, what's changed is us. Last Sunday, all 3 of my children and their families came for dinner. A real family dinner, not an obligation or a manipulation or a test. Richard's kids, who are 12 and 14, sat with me for an hour looking through old photo albums, asking questions about their grandfather they never met, wanting to know family stories. Caroline brought her famous lasagna, the one she learned to make from my mother's recipe. Thomas spent the afternoon fixing my leaky faucet without being asked, just because he noticed it needed fixing. We sat around my table, 5 generations of family history in this house, and we laughed. Real laughter, not the polite kind you force at obligatory gatherings. We told stories, some funny and some sad, about my husband, their father, the man who died too young and left us all a little broken. I think he'd be happy about what we're building, Richard said. The foundation. The family. All of it. I think he'd be proud that you finally figured out what actually matters, I replied. Better late than never. Later that evening, after everyone had left, Caroline stayed behind to help me clean up. We stood at the sink washing dishes in comfortable silence, and she said, I need to tell you something, Mom. Something I've never told anyone. Okay, I said, drying a plate. When I found that will, the fake one you planted, I was relieved, she admitted. Not happy exactly, but relieved. Because it meant you were going to die and I was going to get something that would make my life easier. And that thought, that feeling of relief, has haunted me every day since. What kind of person feels relieved about their mother dying? I took her hand, wet with soap suds, and held it tight. The kind of person who was taught that survival means financial security. The kind of person who was scared and lost, and trying to find solid ground anywhere she could. The kind of person who can recognize that feeling, be horrified by it, and choose to become someone different. Do you forgive me? She asked, tears streaming down her face. For being that person? For thinking those things? I forgive you, I said. But more importantly, you need to forgive yourself. Because you can't move forward while you're still carrying that weight. She collapsed into my arms, sobbing, and I held my daughter the way I should have held her more often over the years. Not as a provider or a benefactor or a future inheritance, but as her mother. Simply, completely her mother. The year is almost up now. Next week is the anniversary of my death. The day I walked back into that attorney's office and revealed I was still alive. David has drafted a new will, but I haven't looked at it yet. I asked him to seal it and not show it to me until the day arrives. Do you know what you're going to do? He asked me last week. Are you going to divide the estate among them? Keep it all for the foundation? Something in between? I don't know yet, I admitted. I need to see who they are on that final day. I need to see if this change is real or if they're just playing a long game. Margaret, he said gently, at some point you have to decide to trust them. Otherwise, you're punishing them forever for a mistake they've apologized for, worked to correct, and genuinely seem to regret. Am I? I asked. Or am I just protecting myself from being disappointed again? Maybe both, he replied. But you can't build a new relationship on the foundation of an old betrayal. At some point, you have to let it go. I've been thinking about that conversation a lot. About forgiveness and trust, and whether people can really change. About whether my test has gone on too long, become too cruel, crossed from justice into revenge. Last night, I made a decision. I called all 3 of my children and asked them to come to my house this evening. I told them I had something important to discuss. They're here now, sitting in my living room, looking nervous. They don't know that today is the day, that the year is officially up, that I'm about to tell them what I've decided. Thank you for coming, I begin, settling into my favorite chair. I know you're all wondering why I asked you here. They nod, exchanging glances. 1 year ago, I gave you a choice, I continue. Visit me once a week, volunteer at the cancer center 4 hours a week, and at the end of the year I would reconsider my will. You've all fulfilled those requirements. In fact, you've exceeded them. Richard clears his throat. Mom, before you say anything else, we need to tell you something. The 3 of us have discussed it, and we want you to give everything to the foundation. I stare at them, certain I've misheard. What? The foundation needs the money more than we do, Caroline says. We're all employed, we all have homes, we're all fine. The people the foundation serves? They're not fine. They need help. We spent the last year watching people die alone, Thomas adds. Sitting with patients who had no one, absolutely no one, to hold their hand at the end. And we kept thinking about how that almost happened to you. How we almost let you die believing we only cared about your money. We can't let that happen to other people. So we want you to leave it all to the foundation, Richard continues. Every penny. And we'll keep working for it, keep building it, keep trying to help people who need it. Not because we expect anything from you. Just because it's the right thing to do. I sit there, tears streaming down my face, unable to speak. We know we don't deserve your forgiveness, Caroline says softly. We know we hurt you in ways that might never fully heal. But we want to spend the rest of our lives trying to be better. To be the children you deserved all along. Whether there's an inheritance or not. I pull out the envelope David gave me this morning, the sealed will I haven't looked at. With trembling hands, I open it. Inside is a document dividing my estate 4 ways. 40% to the foundation and 20% each to Richard, Caroline, and Thomas. But there's also a handwritten note from David. Margaret, I prepared this version a month ago based on what I've observed in your children. But the final decision is yours. I've also included a completely blank will that you can fill out right now, today, based on what your heart tells you. Whatever you choose, I'll make legal. Trust yourself. I look at my 3 children, sitting on the same couch where they sat a year ago when I told them I was leaving everything to charity. Back then they looked panicked, desperate, calculating. Now they just look hopeful, not for money, but for my love. For my forgiveness. For a chance to be my children again. I've been thinking about something my mother told me. I say finally. About how you never really know someone until money's involved. And she was right. Money reveals who people are. But here's what I've learned this year. It also reveals who they can become. I take out a pen and turn to the blank will. I'm making a new decision. Right now, in front of all of you, so there are no more secrets. I write carefully, clearly, making sure every word is legible. I leave 50% of my estate to the Margaret Crawford Foundation for the Forgotten, to be used to support cancer patients without family or financial resources. The remaining 50% is to be divided equally among my 3 children, Richard, Caroline, and Thomas, with the following condition. They must continue to serve on the foundation board and volunteer at the cancer center for at least 100 hours per year. If any of them fails to meet this requirement, their share goes to the foundation. I sign it, date it, and hand it to David. There, I say. That's my final decision. Richard looks stunned. Mom, you don't have to. I know I don't have to, I interrupt. But I want to. Because over the past year, you've shown me that you can change. That you can grow. That you can learn to value things beyond money. And yes, part of me will always wonder if you did it just to get back into my will. But that's my burden to carry, not yours. We didn't do it for the money, Caroline insists. We did it because we love you. I believe you, I say. And the truth is I do. Not completely, not without reservation, but enough. Enough to take this leap of faith. Enough to rewrite the ending. But there's one more thing, I add. I'm not actually dying. They look at each other, confused. What do you mean? Thomas asks. My cancer, I explain. It's in remission. Has been for 4 months. The doctors are optimistic. I might have another 10 years, maybe more. The room is silent as this information sinks in. So this whole year, Richard says slowly, you've been testing us under the assumption that you were dying soon. But you're not. I'm not, I confirm. Which means you're going to have to deal with me for quite a while longer. You're going to have to keep showing up, keep being present, keep proving that this change is real. Not for a year, but for years. Maybe decades. Can you do that? They look at each other again, and then simultaneously they start laughing. Real, genuine, relieved laughter. Yes, Caroline says, wiping tears from her eyes. Yes, we can do that. Good, I reply. Because I'm not done being your mother yet. And you're not done being my children. We have time to get this right. To build something real. To become the family we should have been all along. Thomas gets up and hugs me, really hugs me, for the first time in years. Then Caroline. Then Richard. And we stand there in my living room, the four of us, holding each other and crying and laughing and maybe finally healing. That evening, after they've all gone home, I sit in my study and finish writing this story. Because I want there to be a record. A testimony to what happened when a mother tested her children and discovered they were capable of becoming more than she feared, even if it took a fake death and a year of manipulation to reveal it. Was what I did right? I don't know. Was it cruel? Probably. Was it necessary? For me, yes. Because I needed to know. I needed to see who my children were when they thought I couldn't see them anymore. And what I discovered was complicated, painful, but ultimately hopeful. People can change. Not easily, not quickly, but genuinely. My children were greedy, calculating, and selfish. And now they're trying to be better. That's all any of us can do, really, recognize our failings and try to be better. I'm changing my will one final time next week. I'm removing the volunteer requirement. Because if I've learned anything this year, it's that love given under conditions isn't really love at all. Either my children will continue to show up because they want to, or they won't. Either way, I'll know the truth. And maybe that's all this was ever about. Not punishing them, not teaching them a lesson, but simply learning the truth about who we all are to each other. My name is Margaret Helen Crawford. I'm 72 years old. I have stage 3 lung cancer in remission. I have approximately $2.5 million in assets. I have 3 children who once loved my money more than they loved me. And now I have hope. Hope that the year we spent rebuilding our relationship was real. Hope that the changes I've seen in them will last. Hope that when I actually die, in 10 years or 20 or tomorrow, my children will cry for the right reasons. But more than that, I have today. I have this moment. I have Sunday dinners and garden work and conversations that matter and grandchildren who are learning from their parents' mistakes. I have a foundation that will help people who need it long after I'm gone. I have a second chance at a family I thought I'd lost. And maybe, just maybe, I have the peace that comes from forgiving the people who hurt you and allowing them the space to become someone new. Was it worth it? The fake death, the manipulation, the pain? Ask me in 10 years. Or better yet, ask me on my deathbed, the real one this time, when I can look back and know for certain whether my children stayed because they loved me or because they were still hoping for an inheritance. Until then, I choose hope. I choose forgiveness. I choose to believe that people are capable of change, even when that change is motivated by complicated reasons. I choose to believe that my children love me. And if I'm wrong, well, at least this time I'll die knowing the truth. That's something. It's not everything, but it's something. And sometimes something is enough. Did you like my story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.